just a disclaimer I have to make. This presentation is for informational purposes only. It isn't anything presented in the lecture is not meant to diagnose, treat, or cure anything and should not be a substitute for individualized professional medical advice. I'm going to present some good information here, but everyone is unique and individual, and what someone might be dealing with is different than someone else. And so take this information and use it at your own risk. It is not meant to diagnose or treat any condition. Secondly, conflicts of interest. As Mike said, I am working on behalf of Vital Choice Health Store. And at the time of this lecture, I do not have any monetary endorsements from any companies or supplement manufacturers or products. So anything mentioned in this lecture is just purely for your enrichment and education. All right, so let's talk about gut as the center of health. And I say that because without a proper functioning digestive system, without a properly functioning gut, so to speak, without digesting and eliminating appropriately, you cannot be healthy. And I say that emphatically because I've seen it, I've read about it, learned about it, heard about it. You cannot be healthy if your gut's not functioning, and you'll understand why as we get through it. And the gut's not just for allowing you to eat. That's not what it's designed for. It is allow you to digest, absorb, assimilate, and eliminate waste products. All that combined together is what determines your health. So it's not just there for a place to put food. It is the core. And it's the key to recovery, especially from a lot of the conditions that we'll talk about today, both chronic and acute conditions. If your gut is not functioning, you will not be healing. So let's get into it. First, we need to define what the gut is. It's kind of a slang term and not necessarily a proper term, but it refers to the gastrointestinal tract more precisely, and it includes the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and the colon, sometimes also referred to as the large intestine. These segments or areas of the body are what make up the entire gut. So when I refer to the gut, I'm going to be referring to all those things that I just mentioned. The total surface area is around 32 square meters. And to give you kind of an example, it's roughly probably half the size of a tennis court. So if you kind of were able to unfold the entire area of your gut, it would be probably about roughly half the size of a tennis court. It's responsible for breaking down food into smaller particles, as well as absorbing food. So it breaks it down and absorbs it. And there's some issues with the mechanisms that we'll talk about today regarding what we refer to as leaky gut. But it's also responsible for guarding your exposure to things that you take in internally, exposure to microorganisms, exposure to toxins, and it's also the main ways that you eliminate waste products, both waste products that are produced directly from things that you take into the body, as well as things that are formed inside the body internally from your metabolism. So what is leaky gut? You might have been intrigued by the title when you saw it being advertised, and you were thinking, what does that mean? Our gut's leaking? Is it leaking in, leaking out? Well, it's actually, I'm referring to your gut leaking things, so to speak, inside more than out. It's, again, this is one of those terms, I have it in quotations because it's a term that is not a proper medical term. It's known in the research literature as increased intestinal permeability. That just means increasing the amount of things being let in. So typically, your gut, when it's functioning properly, only allows certain size particles from foods that you're eating in. But if there's some damage that happens, or in the case of what allows things in and out, what's known as the zonulin system with the Z, if that becomes damaged, larger food particles, larger molecules and toxins can come in to the body and not be regulated, and that can wreak havoc on the body. So we'll talk a lot about things that are going to be supportive to that and what things that actually damage that system. and you'll hear me talking about things called tight junctions. And those tight junctions we'll have some pictures and diagrams that will kind of show you where they are in the body, but those are part of the system known as the zonulin system. And that regulates what is allowed in and out. And that's in between all the cells lining your digestive tract. So here's a picture of kind of what that looks like, and I'll orient you to it. The green, all those little green blobs, are the undigested food particles. They can be bacteria, toxins. They're just kind of there representing those things. Each of the cells in between there, those purple semi-rectangular shapes, are what are the cells that are lining the digestive tract. They make up what's called the mucosal membrane, the lining of the digestive tract. And then those yellow dots, or those yellow circles, are what are representative as the tight junctions, which is what we talked about before. Those are tight junctions, which are special types of proteins that bind the cells together. So those cells are next to each other. And those tight junctions form a barrier between what you're taking into your body and then what separates it from inside the blood capillaries, the blood. Now you also see that you see the green blobs that can be either the toxins, undigested food particles, flowing up and down in the center. Well, that's where there's tight junctions are faulty. They're damaged, they're not holding themselves together, and so there's spaces in between the cells. And so it's allowing those green blobs or undigested food particles to come through there. And that's a problem because your body responds to that as being a foreign particle, as it should. But that just causes a lot of immune system dysfunction. This causes inflammation in the body, autoimmune conditions, because again, the systems that regulate what you're absorbing are not there. This next slide is just a more blown up view, just a different view of kind of a representation of what the zonulin system and the tight junctions are. And if you can think of them almost like two pieces of material together, represented by my hands here, and in between the cells in the hands are the proteins that keep the cells stuck together. Now, all those tight junctions are types of proteins. You can almost think of it as a seam in a garment holding things together. And if those things are pulling apart, the threads aren't strong enough together, then you're going to have separation and things that are going to be let through. So just another representation here. Here's another diagram and picture. Don't worry about all the confusing other writing. It's just to show kind of what the inside of the digestive tract looks like. And the little finger-like projections at the top of the screen there, those are known as villi. Those are kind of like finger-like projections that project into the center of your digestive tract from the edge, the lining. So they're kind of projecting in, kind of like my fingers here, projecting into the intestines. Those increase the surface area for helping with absorbing nutrients and interacting with the bacteria and the environment. Now the lower pictures on the screen represent a blown up area of cells, those individual cells that line it. And again, on the left-hand side under the A, you can see something called pathological changes in the mucosal barrier properties. And this is showing again that if you have a dysfunction in that system that binds the cells together, you're going to have bacteria and undigested food particles that come through it. And on the right-hand side, you're going to have one that is showing similar properties, but with a cascade of events that lead to inflammation and autoimmune type conditions. So what causes it? What can cause leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability? Take a look at this list here. It's almost anything and everything. The list is, and this isn't even a complete list, but I tried to break it down into some of the major causes of it. You have both environmental toxins, and one of the biggest offenders of that is glyphosate, or Another name for it would be Roundup, the active component in Roundup, the weed killer. Pesticides, herbicides, these things are toxic to the body in general, but in particular to the digestive tract, and even more specific to that zonulin system, or those tight junctions that allow your cells to maintain bound together. Many different types of drugs and medications can cause this. So some of the common ones that a lot of people are taking, NSAIDs like ibuprofen, antibiotics, blood sugar medications like metformin, proton pump inhibitors or acid blockers, and other types of medications like atypical antipsychotics. And the list goes on and on. There's many different types of medications that can both directly injure the gut as well as indirectly. And by indirectly, it can disrupt the microflora or the beneficial microorganisms in the gut, and those in turn can cause issues with the digestive tract. You then have artificial sweeteners, things such as sweet and low, or generically known as saccharin, things like a neotame, acesulfame potassium, sucralose, or Splenda. These are our artificial sweeteners, chemical sweeteners that can also cause injury to the gut lining. And sweet and low, it's about 300 or 400 times as sweet as just regular table sugar. And neotame is about 8,000 times as sweet. So just a small amount is all they need, but it can definitely cause a lot of issues. Food intolerances. Food intolerances can both come about because of leaky gut, as well as cause injury to the gut lining. One of the big offenders is gluten, or more specifically the protein gliadin, which is a part of the gluten complex. Gluten just refers to a complex of proteins typically in wheat, barley, and rye, though you might find it in other things as well. Eggs, soy, nuts, dairy, and even in some people, potatoes can be a food intolerance. So without removing the intolerances that people have, you might continually be irritating or damaging your digestive system. Microbial dysbiosis, which just means a disruption in your microbiome, your environment, that the bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites, all those things that are unique to you, there's a disruption in that, to where you have more that cause harm and issues than the beneficial ones. Inflammation is on here. That's a big, broad category that I can give an entire lecture on as well, but inflammation, wherever it's coming from, whether it's coming from certain types of bacteria, whether it's coming from stress, both physical stress as well as mental, emotional stress, those can all cause inflammation. Now, inflammation is not bad. It's just not good when it's chronic and when it's not regulated. So we need inflammation to help repair, but when it's chronic and going on all the time, it can definitely cause issues in the body. And this can be caused by and contribute to leaky gut. Trauma, both physical and emotional trauma, traumatic brain injuries and concussions, oftentimes also leads to leaky gut or damage to those tight junctions. Endotoxemia might be a newer term you might not have heard before, but it's essentially special toxins that are released by bacteria when you have large amounts that die off, and they can release something called LPS, or lipopolysaccharides. And this is a toxin that we typically have maybe low levels of, but in large amounts can damage the body. And we'll talk about some certain nutrients and things to help with minimizing that or eliminating these causes of leaky gut. So I tried to break it down into what's happening with the gastrointestinal tract. It's kind of complex, and there's multiple different avenues for what function is being broken down. So one of the first functions is the mucus layer, and that's essentially just a gel-like coating that buffers the contents of the digestive tract from the cells that we took a look at before. So those cells get buffered. And that gel-like tract keeps the bacteria from getting too close. It absorbs certain nutrients and just really soothes the digestive tract. If there's a breakdown in that, then you don't have the ability to buffer stomach acids, buffer bile acids, and you can have more irritation and issues that way. There are things called antimicrobial peptides that your immune system releases, both in and around the digestive tract, that help kill bacteria. And if there's a dysfunction in that, then you might have an imbalance in beneficial bacteria, or bacteria that need to be killed won't be killed. There's something else called secretory IgA. And anytime you see Ig, which stands for immunoglobulin, you might see IgA, you might see IgG. That is referring to what are known as antibodies. They are special types of proteins released by the immune system, and they bind to bacteria, they bind to foreign particles. They also are kind of communication molecules between cells. And if this secretory IgA, which is secreted into the digestive tract to identify and bind onto foods and bacteria and communicate between cells, if this isn't happening, you can have, again, a dysfunction in the protection of the digestive tract. You also have epithelial junction adhesion complex. Again, that's a kind of a long, fancy term just for what we talked about previously, the tight junctions, those proteins that are binding the cells together and only allowing certain molecules through. So if that's broken down, there's another issue that is allowing for leaky gut. And then you have the microbiome in and of itself, which just refers to all the different types of bacteria and microorganisms, which include viruses and fungi and all the other different types of microorganisms out there. That has to be in balance. And there are some that are more harmful to us and some that are more beneficial to us. And if that gets out of balance by, let's say, antibiotic use, medications, certain types of pesticides and toxins in our water supply, stress, that can change our microbiome. And so that's going to play a role into it as well. So kind of broken it down into kind of 5 main areas to kind of consider. And what you'll find as we go through some of the products and nutrients that are helpful is that they're going to be repairing and or supporting these barrier defenses. Okay, so now let's get down to it. What are the health effects of leaky gut, or of an increase in gut permeability? And take a look at this list. I'm going to leave it up here for a little longer than normal. It's far-reaching, and it's far-reaching because of all the different effects that inflammation has, all the different effects that a dysfunctional immune system has, and it reaches far beyond than what you even imagine. So looking at brain fog, depression, anxiety, why would that be affected by gut health? Well, if you're not absorbing certain nutrients, if certain toxins and bacteria are being allowed to come into the body, they don't just stay in the gut. They can travel places. They can travel to the brain. They can cause your body to not be as efficient with energy. And so the energy gets depleted, which then relates to more the fatigue all the time. You have, your typical gas, bloating, diarrhea, and constipation. These are all signs of, what leaky gut can bring about. Food allergies, that's a big one. Again, because you're allowing in larger than normal food particles, which the body looks at as abnormal or foreign. And so it mounts an immune defense against it. And that in turn causes more immune dysfunction. So looking at them all, you have migraine headaches, you have, the conventional abdominal pain, which makes sense. Certain types of arthritis, so inflammations in the joints, frequent colds and flus, lots of different skin conditions. The gut is the center of health, and a lot of times it's conditions that are happening on the skin, such as eczema and psoriasis, any type of skin inflammation, it's not just because of what you're putting on it. Though there are some, circumstances that their skin is directly affected by what you put on it. But I guarantee that's not the only thing, especially if it's a chronic issue that keeps coming back. I can almost guarantee that you should be looking at how your gut's functioning in order to heal your skin. So lots of different types, ADD, ADHD, trouble concentrating, it's all can relate back to leaky gut. So it's pretty far reaching. So how do you know if you have it? Well, you can probably almost guarantee that everyone's going to have it to some extent. How severe you have it is going to depend on each person. And the only people that probably don't have it at all, well, if you don't have it, if you're not having any exposure to environmental toxins, if you have no stress, either physical or emotional, if you don't take any drugs or medications, if you have no nutrient depletions, no food intolerances, are practicing healthy lifestyle habits daily, have no acute or chronic conditions, then maybe you don't have it. But for the vast majority of people, I can probably guarantee that everyone has it to some extent. So can you test for it? Yeah, there are some tests out there to test for it. There's a lactulose mannitol test, which just essentially you drink predetermined amounts of lactulose and mannitol, and then you measure how much is in there over 6 hours in your urine. There are certain companies that do that, but they can be expensive. And most of the things that we're talking about today, there isn't really too much harm in doing them. And if you just kind of assume that you have leaky gut, based on if you have any of the conditions that were listed previously, it's probably pretty certain you have leaky gut to some extent. So you can just save your money, may not have the test, and just assume you have it and start working on supporting your gut health. So what are the nutrients that heal the gut? Let's talk about them, because that's really what people are here for. Is now that we talked about kind of what it is, how do I help myself with this? And it's going to be a bit more complex than just giving you certain nutrients. You're going to have to work with a healthcare practitioner or really do your own investigation to see what are some things that I'm doing that I might not know about that are providing a barrier to helping my gut heal. Are there certain food intolerances or allergies that I have? Are there certain lifestyle practices that I'm doing that are not beneficial to my gut? And so taking this along with diet and lifestyle practices is going to be the best, and it's going to help maintain long-term support and healing. So let's talk about foods that heal the gut. The first foods that are going to heal the gut. This is not a complete list by any means, but it gives you a good understanding of how. We got bone broth and collagen on the list here. Those are providing the building blocks to help with repair of the gut lining. The bone broth especially also has components in it that not just with collagen or proteins, but it has nutrients like electrolytes. It'll have hyaluronic acid, which is really great for joint health, but also for helping with healing the gut and soothing. You'll have things called glucosamine, which people think of that as a building block more for joints, but it's also really helpful for the gut lining. Salmon. So salmon has certain types of proteins in there that are really beneficial for the gut. And we'll talk a little bit about some of them, I think, later. But they have some healing protein properties to them. And it's also, as well as they are filled with omega-3 fatty acids that are also both anti-inflammatory and help support the immune system and hormone function and are part of every cell in your body. So, getting good quality salmon, ginger and turmeric are both anti-inflammatory and have some, support for digestion as well. You got coconut, both the milk, the oils, and the raw coconut has some components in there that are antimicrobial and very soothing to the GI tract. They also have some special fats in there that help support the cells that line the digestive tract as fuel. Flax seeds, make sure that they're ground up because your body can't really digest them very well, but grind them up so you can get some of the good fats as well as help with maintaining bowel movements. That's real important for gut health. And then the fermented and cultured foods, so apple cider vinegar, things like kimchi and sauerkraut, the cultured types of foods. Those, one, provide some beneficial bacteria, but also the byproducts of bacteria that are very beneficial for the gut as well. So fruits and vegetables, always on that list. There's beneficial fibers that are going to help support the bacteria in your gut, as well as help maintain regularity in the gut. So these are all very great things to incorporate in a healthy diet, not just for gut health, but overall in general. So let's talk about some of the specific nutrients that you can get, particularly for gut health. We'll go through these in more detail, but we got certain types of digestive enzymes in there in case you are exposed to gluten and you determine that you need to be gluten-free. You have probiotics and amino acid called glutamine. So we'll go through all these in more detail in the next coming slides here. So enzymes. Enzymes are meant to digest certain food particles to make them smaller so you can absorb them more readily. There's digestive enzymes in general that break down proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, as well as certain types of fibers. And even if you don't do it for long term, especially if you think that you have something going on with your gut, it's not a bad idea to supplement with them to kind of ease the burden of digestion. And while you're healing your gut and working on, increasing your digestive strength, have these in there. That way you're able to absorb the food and use it properly, and it takes the burden off the gut. There is certain types of enzyme known as DPP4 enzyme, and that enzyme is specific to digesting gluten. And gluten is a particular type of hard to digest proteins that has been shown to damage the tight junctions, damage those proteins that bind the cells together, and then that increases gut permeability. So particularly, especially if you're ill or having trouble with digestion, it might not be a bad idea to have the DPP4 enzyme on board in case you're out at a restaurant or you might accidentally be exposed to the gluten. It helps to really kind of minimize that burden on the digestive system. Probiotics. There's so much research on probiotics. These are the beneficial microorganisms, beneficial bacteria in the gut that plays a huge role in the gut. It strengthens both the tight junctions that we've been talking about. It increases what they call mucin production. So mucin is a component in kind of that mucus layer, that gel-like layer that's in between the cells that helps protect it and soothe it. It increases secretion of IgA. That's that special types of antibodies that are secreted to limit and manage different types of bacteria. You also have competition with the good bacteria and either the bad bacteria or the not so good bacteria. So they help kind of compete and keep each other in check. There are certain probiotics that actually directly kill or inhibit the growth of pathogenic or bad bacteria strains. They produce things like bacterocins that are directly just killing to the bad bacteria. So lots of different functions of probiotics, and there's so many out there. But getting a good quality one that even that you take kind of on a regular basis, especially if you're in the mode of renewing and helping to heal your gut function. All right, so L-glutamine. L-glutamine, also known as sometimes just glutamine, is an amino acid that is the most abundant amino acid inside your cells as well as outside your cells, and is also unique in that it is the preferred fuel for both the lining of your small intestines, known as enterocytes, and the lining of your large intestines, known as colonocytes. So it's really a fuel for them, and it's has so much research on it with decreasing inflammation, again, restoring that barrier function in between the cells. And what they've noticed is that depletion of glutamine can result in what they call villus atrophy. So those finger-like projections that we were looking at in the beginning, atrophy just means a shrinking. So the shrinking of the finger-like projections and decreasing the expression of those tight junctions really causes that increase in intestinal permeability, as well as kind of a decrease in the absorption of nutrients. So this is really important and probably one of the main ones that you'll find in formulas that have that support the gut and gastrointestinal tract. So it's pretty crucial. Aloe vera, also known as Aloe barbadensis, a special type of kind of succulent that really has anti-inflammatory properties to it. It's very healing and soothing to the digestive tract. You really want to make sure that it's aloe vera or aloe barbadensis and not aloe ferox or Cape aloe, or some people are known as bitter aloe. While there's some uses for those are used more for like laxative effects and have some harsh components to them that are not going to be beneficial for healing. So just make sure that it's more of the aloe vera kind. And a lot of times good companies will say that they've removed something called like the latex, or you might hear it called bitter latex or aloin. Aloin's another name. It's just some of the components that are in there that cause more that irritant laxative effects and are some that you don't want. So just make sure, most good companies will either say it on there or you can call them up and they'll tell you that they've removed it. But it's antiviral, antibacterial, immune modulating, so it modulates the immune system or keeps it in balance. So very soothing, very healing to the digestive tract. Long history of use. So again, you can do it by itself, or sometimes you might even find it in formulas that will have it in there. And then there's a special type of licorice called deglycyrrhizated licorice, or DGL for short. And this is a special type of licorice where they have processed it to remove glycyrrhizin. And glycyrrhizin, while it has benefits in and of itself, because it can interact with certain blood pressure medications, and certain hormones and things, they've removed it because that's not what they designed the product to do. The DGL in and of itself has soothing to inflamed and injured mucous membranes, or the lining of the digestive tract. Really good for stomach ulcers. There's a lot of research behind that to helping soothe stomach ulcers. And the stomach and intestines, they're all kind of continuous in what's going on with them. It also inhibits the growth of what's known as H. pylori, which is a bacteria that's associated both with ulcers in the stomach as well as intestinal permeability. And generally they come in tablets that you can chew, and you chew these tablets up, chew them up really well. 250 to 500 milligrams are kind of typically what they come in. And you do them about 15 minutes before meals, and it really helps to kind of coat the esophagus, coat the stomach, and further down the digestive tract really helps as well. So you do it about 15 minutes before meals, chew them up, allow them to dissolve. And then you can also do it 1 or 2 hours before bed, especially if you get more of those, heartburn, irritation before, or GI symptoms before bed. So really protective, really soothing to the GI tract. And again, you'll find this in formulas as well for GI tract health. The next component we have is known as zinc L-carnosine. Now it's important to know that this is a special combination of both zinc and the amino acid combination L-carnosine. So it's not just taking them separately. You will not get the same benefit or effect from that. There's a special type of patented trademark name called Pepsin GI. And you might see that on labels, sometimes you might not. But it's a special type, and it's because of that combination that allows it to help with decreasing the injury to the small intestines as well as the gastric, so the stomach portion of the digestive tract. It's anti-inflammatory. It has some antioxidant functions to it, and really has some research behind it for, again, helping with ulcers and what's known as mucositis, which is just an inflammation in the mucous membranes, and in this case, oral, so mucous membranes of the mouth. There's some benefits to it. It protects the tissues and is very reparative. So some formulations you see for, heartburn and GI distress, you might find that zinc L-carnosine is in there. Zinc just by itself, without the L-carnosine, also has some benefits to the digestive tract. So you might also see other forms of zinc in there, but this is one to pay attention to. And there might be some research with regard to it being, inhibit the H. pylori as well. All right, butyrate or butyric acid. Mainly, you're going to find this with being produced by your own bacteria when you feed it the proper fibers or proper prebiotics. Prebiotics is kind of a fancy term for special fibers in the diet, but the bacteria in your gut take the fibers that you can't digest, they use them as food, and they produce byproducts, some of them known as short-chain fatty acids, but more specifically, one of those short-chain fatty acids is known as butyrate or butyric acid. And this also is another main source of fuel for the cells that are lining the colon, so the colonocytes that we referred to earlier. You can also find this directly in good quality butter and ghee, G-H-E-E. Ghee is a special type of butter. So essentially what they've done is you take butter and it's gently heated to remove certain types of butter proteins and fats. And then you're just left with kind of that clear fat liquid on top, used a lot in Ayurvedic medicine. Again, is very healing and nourishing to the gut. It's got some anti-inflammatory properties to it. It decreases bacteria that are more what they call virulent or more aggressive. So it decreases the aggressiveness of bacteria, and it decreases the harm that they could potentially have as well. And here we go again, it enhances the intestinal barrier by regulating the assembly of tight junctions. So it's helping to reform and repair those tight junctions in the lining of the digestive tract. And then we have some botanicals, and I kind of lumped both of these together, slippery elm bark and marshmallow root, because they are very similar. They're what are known as mucilaginous demulcents, so kind of forming a gel-like soothing property to them. That's what the demulcent means, more like soothing, soothing and coating. So it soothes the irritation in the GI tract, but not just the GI tract, it's any type of place that has what's known as mucous membranes. So it's the lining of the GI tract, but it's also the lining of the respiratory tract. It's also the urinary tract, and they have anti-inflammatory properties to them. You can also use them topically to help heal and soothe burns and ulcers and inflammatory skin conditions. And then the slippery elm bark, because it's a bark, you're going to have some of the fibers in there as well. You can also has more of sometimes a bit of a laxative effect to it. So making sure you're drinking some water with that, you can both soothe as well as support bowel movements with it. And then again, I've kind of lumped these two botanicals, really great botanicals for inflammation, turmeric and boswellia. They both act on different pathways in the inflammatory cascade or inflammatory process in the body. So a lot of times you might see them together, and they really kind of complement each other, both being anti-inflammatory. Turmeric has so many studies and research behind it. One of the components that's been studied a lot in turmeric is known as curcumin, and that has a lot of research behind it, with it being an antioxidant and protects the heart and protects the liver. But it's not the only component. There are lots of other components in turmeric as well, hundreds of others. So finding more of a well-rounded turmeric that includes curcumin, as well as things called turmerones, those are beneficial as well, but they help with increasing bile production, decreases blood pressure, stimulates digestive enzyme production, and so much more. I couldn't even list it all. Boswellia, both antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, It has some studies being anti-carcinogenic, and it's also been studied to look at the ulcerative colitis as well. All right, and then the last one I believe we're going to be talking today is vitamin A. And this is kind of one I threw in at the end. I haven't talked too much about it in the past, but vitamin A directly improves the intestinal barrier function. And if you remember what I talked about in the beginning was something called LPS, or lipopolysaccharide. That is the special type of toxin released by bacteria that die off, and that can change the barrier and damage the tight junctions. Vitamin A is shown to be helpful in repairing those. So again, there's some formulas that Vital Choice has that has vitamin A in it, and a lot of the other components that I referred to tonight that both repair and soothe and help with inflammation. It's also anti-inflammatory. But again, it's not just for the GI tract. Any types of lining that have what they call epithelial cells, so cells that line the digestive tract, cells that line the lungs, inside the mouth. The lining is a small, thin lining over the eyes. A lot of these have multi-purposes to them, which is what makes nutrients and nutrition so amazing. And then vitamin A also modulates the immune system, which just means it keeps it in balance, so it doesn't go too far one way or the other. So lots of good benefits to this. If you're looking for more information about where I got all this information and want to really dive into it, here are all my references that I used in preparing this lecture. And these slides should be available to you once the video gets posted. But hopefully everyone got a lot of information out of this. Maybe for some of you it might have been rushed, and so you might need to go back and rewatch this. But thank you for attending. I am happy to take questions now. So with that, I will turn it back over to Mike to get the questions, and we'll see where we go from there.
All right. Yes, thank you, Dr. Healey. That was really informative. I will look at some of the questions. So we do have quite a few to go over. So I'm just going to start at the top, Dr. Healey, and we'll get going. So the first question we have is, if a person has leaky gut, how much will digestive enzymes taken orally help?
A good question. It will help in that it will reduce the burden of on the digestive tract. It will not provide the nutrients that heal or repair the lining of the digestive tract. So I can't give you a percentage of how much it will help, but it is one of those things that will at least reduce the burden on your digestive tract and reduce the amount of larger particles that might be getting through your increased gut permeability. So I don't have a percentage on that, but it's not a bad idea to take them at least for a time while you're working on healing and repairing your digestive tract. And that might take, it might take months for some people, just because depending on how extensive the damage can be.
Okay. Another question came in. This person asks, I've heard from the traditional medical community that the condition of leaky gut isn't medically proven. How did natural medicine determine the validity of leaky gut?
Another good question. So while leaky gut, you won't find in the literature, if you were to search on either PubMed or Google Scholar, if you were to type in gut permeability or intestinal permeability, you will find many research studies on that. I don't know how natural medicine in of itself, if they directly identified it prior to everyone else, and or how they did it. So I can't comment on that, but I do know that it definitely is getting becoming more well known even in the medical community. Now they may not recognize it, but it definitely is there in the research, and a lot of those references that I posted at the end are out of medical journals and research journals. So that's something to take a look at.
Okay. Next question is, does leaky gut cause acid reflux?
Not necessarily. Leaky gut, while it can definitely be paired along with acid reflux, you can definitely probably have acid reflux just by itself without it. Acid reflux, depending on how it's presenting, can be more of a dysfunction in how well you're digesting and breaking down foods, which could then lead to a leaky gut or increased gut permeability. But you could have one without the other. I don't think acid reflux causes it, unless you're talking about the reflux that's going into the esophagus from the stomach, damaging and causing issues in the esophagus. Then yes, you can definitely have some issues with the lining of the esophagus from acid reflux. But you can also have them separately. They're interrelated but separate, if that makes sense.
A related question to that came in, which is DGL good for acid reflux?
DGL can be very good for acid reflux in that, as we mentioned before, it really helps to kind of repair and soothe the digestive tract lining, as well as producing that mucus layer, that soothing coating layer that your cells produce to buffer the stomach acid that's in the stomach, as well as from getting up into the esophagus. And one of the strong associated bacteria that is associated with either acid reflux or ulcers is H. pylori, and DGL has been supported to help with inhibit that growth as well. So yes, DGL is very good for helping with acid reflux or heartburn-like symptoms.
Okay, thanks. You did touch on this, but I wanted to ask it just in case there was a little bit more information. And that was a question came in asking about, are there specific tests that can be done to examine the gut and identify that one has leaky gut?
Yeah, so the one test that I mentioned was lactulose and mannitol tests. Now, these are not tests that you can go to your conventional doctor and order, or at least to my knowledge, probably not. Maybe a gastroenterologist might be able to order them, but some of them you can actually get yourself. So one of the companies, and again, I don't have any affiliations with them, but Genova Diagnostics is one. That's GENOVA Diagnostics, and they have some information of running one. And I believe there's one called Doctor's Data that also has a test that looks at the gut permeability. And again, that's looking at special types of sugars, so lactulose and mannitol, and it measures how much is absorbed and excreted by the body in a certain amount of time. And then based on that, they're able to tell what percentage or how much or how strong your leaky gut symptoms are.
Okay. Here's a question. I think it may deal with butyrate, but I'm not sure. Since dairy is one of the leaky gut triggers, would butter still be good to take?
That's a good question. Because it is derived from dairy, that would be, again, more of an individualized choice. If you are blatantly, have an intolerance to or allergy to dairy, then that would be something that probably you would stay away from. And in which case you can enhance your body's own production of butyrate or enhance the bacteria in your gut's production by feeding it good prebiotics or good types of fibers that your own body will make. So it won't be coming from a dairy source. But some people, even if they are intolerant to milk and cheese and things of that nature, because of how butter is processed, or more specifically how ghee is processed, you might still be able to tolerate it well. It can still be very healing to a lot of people.
Okay. Is turmeric the spice the same as turmeric the supplement?
Yes and no. Turmeric the spice is essentially just the root ground up, and it's really great for cooking. You'll still get some benefits to it. It is what is known as having some fat soluble components to it. So, traditionally in Ayurvedic medicine, they'll put it in like coconut oil, or they'll combine it with ghee. So that's beneficial. But the supplement is going to be a much more concentrated version of turmeric, the spice. So there are certain components that are going to be extracted while leaving behind the fibers and the starches that don't necessarily have direct medicinal value. So you're going to have much more stronger concentration of turmeric in a supplement form versus the spice. But you should definitely still cook with and use the spice because there's some great benefits to it.
Okay. Regarding probiotics, is one form better than another to take? Capsule, powder, refrigerated, heat treated? What are the benefits of one over another? Or does it depend on each person's unique issue?
Yeah, it is going to depend on each person's unique issue because probiotics are what are known as strain specific. So depending on what you're dealing with, some people might respond better to certain strains than others, and certain strains might be studied in the research more than others. But when you're just looking at capsule versus powder versus refrigerated or shelf stable, for the most part, as long as they're a good quality company, there isn't much of a difference. Where you might notice a difference is in between companies if one version is using certain strains that work well with your body versus another. There are some people who say that they take the ones in the refrigerator and they find that they work a little better than maybe the ones on the shelf. But again, there's a lot of people who view the opposite. So it's not going to matter too much as long as it's coming from a good quality company. And there are certain probiotics that are geared more towards colon health or geared more towards just general overall intestinal health. Certain strains can also be more beneficial to women's health versus men's health. So there's some slight differences with them. But in general, as long as it's coming from a good quality company, it shouldn't matter too much if it's a capsule versus a powder or refrigerator versus non.
Okay. We have someone that says, great presentation. Good job, Dr. Healey. And then the question is there a combination formula at Vital Choice rather than taking everything individually?
Yeah, so there are some combination ones. One of the ones that we sell is known as Gluta Shield. That's Gluta Shield, SHIELD. And that's by a company called Orthomolecular, I think it's medicine. And that one is a powder. And it combines both, or almost all the ones that I mentioned. It has the glutamine in there, which is really beneficial. It has the DGL in a powder form. It has the aloe in powder form. It has the zinc in there, as well as I believe it also has the vitamin A. So it has really kind of almost the majority of the nutrients I listed in there. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback with it. So that one's a really good one, especially if you're not looking to buy all these individually and just want a good solid, a gut healing product. That would be a really good one to take. And also keep in mind, I think it was asked before, or I may have seen the question, it's not something that your gut's going to heal overnight, especially if it's been going on for a while. It might be something that you really need to work on replenishing and healing probably over months at a time, 3-4 months at a time. And depending on how much injury happens with past use of antibiotics or, allergies and things, it might take even longer. But for sure, I would definitely give it, a good 3-4 months with a good solid program looking at things overall, diet, lifestyle, foods that you're eating, allergens and such. So yeah, hope that helps.
Okay, just a few more questions. We're going to try to stick to the 7:30 time, but we still have a few more to get to. Quick question: are Tums good to take before eating?
It depends on who you talk to. Tums are just a form of calcium carbonate, which is going to stop or neutralize your stomach acid. And in my opinion, it's not something good to take before eating because your stomach acid is meant to digest and break down the food that you're about to eat. And so if you're neutralizing that or stopping that, then your stomach and body are going to have to work a lot harder to digest the food if they digest it properly at all. And that can cause more distress on the system. So I know they're promoted a lot for helping with heartburn, but if you're getting rid of stomach acid, which is the main way of digesting certain proteins, as well as absorbing certain nutrients like minerals, you're kind of cutting your digestive system off at the knees. So I would not do that. I would kind of look at some other ways of helping your digestive system other than chewing on Tums.
Another question: how does alcohol affect gut health?
Ooh, how does alcohol affect gut health? That's probably a whole nother lecture in and of itself. For one thing, there's alcohol is what you can kind of consider an anti-nutrient. So a lot of nutrients are used up in processing alcohol. How it directly affects the gut, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but a lot of the things that happen after alcohol is absorbed, it does have some toxicity to the heart as well as the brain. And I'm sure there's things that disrupt the microbiome or the bacteria in the gut and change that, causing inflammation and such. So off the top of my head, that's what I'll say. I don't know any direct mechanisms with that, but that would definitely be something to consider reducing or eliminating while you're healing the gut.
Okay, very good. And we did just get an input from, I guess, Nicole Gould is watching. So she's also a member of the Vital Choice team, and she points out that alcohol can inhibit enzyme production. So that's one way that it can kind of interfere, I think, with digestion. So thanks, Nicole. Appreciate that. Couple other questions, and then we still have a few, so we might have to answer some of these via follow-up email, which we will put the answers to those questions on the webinar page, because I don't want to keep everybody here too awfully late, but these are some really, really great questions. So if you can answer this one quickly, I think this is an involved one, Dr. Healey, but I wanted to pose it. Does leaky gut cause food allergies, and how can these allergies be treated?
Yes, leaky gut can cause food allergies, and in repairing the gut lining and kind of retraining or allowing the immune system to rest from the constant assault of the larger food particles, over time, you can kind of essentially cause the immune system not to respond to those foods. Now, it might take months, years, even for that to happen. But yes, it's strongly linked with leaky gut. Allergies and leaky gut are strongly linked.
Okay, two more questions for you. And then, as I said, a few others we're going to have to answer via email. Number one, can you differentiate between probiotics and prebiotics and explain when you would use each?
Yes, so probiotics are just the beneficial bacteria that are in your gut, or if you're taking as a supplement. Prebiotics are essentially the fertilizer or the food for the probiotics. So one is the food that they eat, one is the actual bacteria that you're taking in. A lot of formulations might have both of them in it. Some I've even heard argue it's probably better to do prebiotics just because you're feeding the gut bacteria that are already there, and the ones that are in your digestive system already are kind of already set up shop. Versus ones that you take externally, it might stay there a few days before passing on. So probably prebiotics coming from foods, as well as certain nutritional supplements might be a good way to go to help with balancing your probiotics and beneficial microflora.
Great. And then the last question for this evening, and again, Dr. Healey, this is one that we could probably do. We've talked about doing some of these maybe 5 or 10 minute mini webinar, mini videos on. But if you could just summarize quickly, one person asks, what do you consider the top nutrients to take for leaky gut if a person could only take 3 or 4 supplements? So I know that's kind of tough because it's individualized, but I pose it because I think it's a good question.
Yeah. So the top ones are going to be probably almost in the order in which I gave them. So L-glutamine would be probably one of the top ones in there. DGL would probably be the next other top ones. Finding the right probiotic for you would be another one, as well as probably aloe would be a good one, or probably the zinc carnosine, I would say. So if you just had to take a few of them, I would probably say glutamine, DGL, zinc carnosine, and some probiotics.
And if I'm not mistaken, that GlutaShield product you mentioned, doesn't it have several of those in it?
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. So that might be a good place to start, even just one product that combines multiple remedies. I'm going to sneak one more in. You kind of answered one question, but the second part to a question about where to start with gut health. How does one reduce gas while using products that contain inulin?
Well, you might stay away from the inulin if you know it's causing gas, but certain products depending on where the gas is coming from. There are certain products like peppermint soft gels, things like charcoal to help with absorbing the gas. There are like fenugreek and fennel, ginger. Those are things that help support digestion as well as reduce gas production. So it really depends on kind of where it's coming from. If it's coming from more lower down in the digestive tract, then maybe the bacteria are a little bit imbalanced, or you might switch to some other type of fiber that maybe your body can handle a little better.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Healey. This was great. And again, everyone, this whole webinar will be posted to our website sometime tomorrow. So if you want to rewatch and the few questions that we didn't get to, we will post answers to on that page as well. So thank you very, very much. Next month in April, we're still working on our next webinar, but please stay tuned. We will post the upcoming webinars on that same page. And then, of course, wherever you found out about tonight's webinar, we will post it there as well. So thank you very, very much for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Healey, for a great webinar.
You're welcome. Thank you all. Have a good
Have a
night.
great night.